COVID-19 toward the economy. And then after that, we will be focused on sectoral shock, trend and reallocation and the business cycle. And third, we will be focused on labor market transition, inequality and recession. And after that, we will go through policy response to the COVID-19 shock. And the last one, it will be the conclusion. So now let's moving on to the introduction in which it will be present by me. So since the late 2019 until the present day, the COVID-19 pandemic is continued to widespread across the globe and still led to the economic disruption and worker dislocation. We can see that there is two remarkable negative impact on the rise of unemployment and the decline in labor force participation. You can see that in the figure 3.1 and 3.2 on labor market condition in advanced economy and in emerging market of developing economy. It shows that the impact of COVID-19 toward the employment rate has been unequal across the group of workers, especially to youth and the lower skilled workers are strongly impact in average advance with the larger rise of unemployment rate, and it has a major decline in labor force participation. And however, if you look at the panel 3 graph of figure 3.1 and 3.2, it shows the effect of COVID-19 by gender. It shows that the labor market condition of women in emerging market and developing economy are hit harder than men by the impact of COVID-19. And also the unemployment rate is high, and the decline of labor force participation of women is larger than men. However, while in advanced economy, there is a little difference in average of unemployment rate across gender. The movement in unemployment and the labor force participation rate show that the average of employment rate have declined across the group in advanced economy. So in short, this chapter will mainly focus on unemployment, labor market transition, such as job finding, separation, and movement of employment across sector and occupation, and earning over the business cycle across the group. And in addition, this chapter are also trying to explain on how policy, specifically to the policy that supporting job retention, worker reallocation, that can those policy diminish the damage that has been done by the COVID-19. So since this chapter, they use a newly developed and market model to examine on how policy and shock persistence interact by drawing on empirical study and model-based analysis, in which it will be focused on the four following main questions. So the first question we will be analyzed by focusing on the sectoral character of the COVID-19 pandemic reversion, and we will define the difference if we compare it, and we will define what is the difference if we compare for the present reversion with the past reversion. And second, we will be focused on the behavior of labor market inflow and outflow across the sector in process of recession and process of recovery, and do the recession tend to amplify sectoral employment trend. And for the third question, we will be analyzed based on how do individual level labor market outcome behave and the difference across demographic group, in which it divided by age, gender, and skill in the business cycle. And the last question, the last one will be analyzed through the comparison on the effectiveness between labor market policy, in which it encourages job retention versus worker reallocation, again the adverse effect from the asymmetric shock across sector and occupation, and we will be understand and it will be answer the question that does the persistence of shock matter. Um, thank you. That is all. Let me give the floor to Satyanit for the subsequent slide.
So I will continue with the introduction. Um, the main finding of the chapter, and the first finding is that the COVID-19 pandemic shock is accelerating pre-existing employment trends with uneven impact across demographic groups. Noticeably, it impacted more heavily on youth and the lower skilled, which reflecting differences in various sectors. Moreover, in emerging market and developing economies, we can see that on average, women's unemployment has risen more than men's. And the second finding is the pandemic recession is likely to inflict sizable costs on unemployed workers, particularly the lower skilled. Normally, when unemployment happens, workers choose to reallocate across sectors and occupations, and such reallocation is costly because they will experience an average earning penalty of about 15%, and it costs not only for personal but for the social as well. Lower skilled workers are more likely to be employed in sectors that are more negatively impacted by the pandemic, as well as to become unemployed in downturns. However, for those who can find a new job, are more likely needing to switch occupation, which make them suffer and earning fall. And the third finding is both retention and reallocation policy can help mitigate the impact on workers. So the job retention policy refers to the policies such as wage subsidy and short-term work scheme, which is effective in lowering separations. And worker reallocation policy are the policies such as hiring incentive, job search and matching assistance, and retraining program, which can boost job finding and on-the-job occupational switches by those who still in employment. And it has found that lower skilled workers are more likely to be benefit more from job retention policy, and the allocation policy benefit more on women and youth. So overall, the findings suggest that countries with physical space should maintain support for job retention until the pandemic decreases, which helping to avoid socially costly unemployment spells and to weaken the effect on more disadvantaged groups. Moreover, the policy could also be designed to target more affected worker groups. For example, increase wage subsidy for youth or lower skilled workers in order to reduce the unequal impact of the shock. And that's it for my part. Let's move to the next presenter.
So now let's move on to the sectoral shock trends in reallocations and the business cycles. So by looking at the graph, we can see that the shock, the COVID-19 pandemic shock actually hit sectors differently compared to the previous recession. So the COVID-19 pandemic shock has hit sectors that are more vulnerable to automations. And also around the world, youth and lower skills are more heavily impacted on average, partly reflecting the differences in workforce composition across sectors. So in advanced economy, the sharpest drop in employment were in the wholesale and retail trade, transportations, accommodations, and food service, as well as arts and entertainment sectors. Compared to previous recession over the last 50 years, the most impacted sector were manufacturing and construction sectors. So besides the drastic change of the impacted industry, the overall sectoral pattern of numerous industries shows that previous recessions and COVID-19 pushes employment away from sectors that are more vulnerable to automations. So the reason is that, according to McKinsey, most industries such as manufacturing and agriculture are moving into automations because of the reasons such as the shift of labor market dynamic, which means that automation is more cost efficient. And also, sometimes human capital and labors require more wage compared to machines. And also, automation provides more benefits which substitute human labors and as well as other regulatory benefits. Next slide, please. Can we move to next slide? Yes. So the economic shock during the COVID-19 pandemic hit the labor market unequally because according to the graph itself, these two graphs are based on the job posting online collected by the papers. It shows that during COVID-19 and the economic shocks, youth, women, and lower skilled workers tend to face more higher risk of unemployment. And the latest high frequency data on trends in online job posting, which is the graph, suggests that these mentioned sectors are underperformed, which means youth, low skilled worker, and women find it harder to find jobs during COVID-19 crisis. Next slide, please. So overall, the COVID-19 pandemic shocks have impact into the world into two main important ways. So first of all, the shock actually shift the labor's demand from sectors that require human to sectors that are less prone to automations because automation actually provides more benefits. And because of the reallocation of skilled workers, there are less employment for low skilled women and youth labor. So moving on to the next presenter.
So now we move on to the third part, which is about labor market transition, inequality, and recession. So COVID-19 pandemic has caused the labor market transition across different population and business cycle. Labor market transition refer to the process that the unemployed person finding the job, employed person losing their job, or the employed person changing their job or occupation. And the labor market transition is different across business cycle. And in this paper, the business cycle that we include are the recession, recovery, and expansion period, while the demographic group include youth, lower skilled worker, and women. We move to the next slide. So in the second slide, we can see the graph in the right hand side that illustrates the average probability of labor movement across business cycle in percentage. And in this graph, the blue graph refer to the expansion period, which is the period that the economy is moving out of recession, while the red one refer to the recovery period, which is the period that which is the year after the recession, and the yellow one refer to the year of negative real GDP. In this graph, we can see that. So in this graph, we can see that there are highest percentage. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hello everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, In this graph, it illustrates that there are highest percentage of people finding job during the expansion period than the other two periods. While we can see that there are highest percentage of people losing their job during the recession period, and also people tend to change their job during the expansion period. And moving on to the next slide. In this slide, we can see two different graphs. So first, I will present on the left one, the left graph, which present on the average probability of labor movement across demographic group. And demographic group here we have women, which is in green, lower skill in gray color, and youth in blue. So we can see that the lower skill worker and women tend to have difficulty finding job than youth, while at the same time the lower skill worker and youth are more likely to lose their job than women. And last but not least, youth are more likely to change the occupation than the lower skill worker and women. And as for the right graph, it represents similar finding to the left graph, but it's just that this time it focused on the recession period. In the recession period, youth is have difficulty finding job than women and the lower skill worker, while the lower skill and youth tend to lose their job than women. Meaning that there are high percentage of lower skill worker and youth in the job separation. And as for the job sectoral shift, we don't see the clear pattern due to effect from the job separation. So according to this finding, the writer can conclude that women is less hurt by COVID-19 recession than the other two groups, which is lower skill worker and youth. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we focus on the shift in unemployment and the associated earning change. So the shift in employment is very common during COVID-19 pandemic because of the availability to work from home. So workers tend to try to redirect their job search toward the industry that is less severely hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, we can also see that we can also see from the graph that the occupation switch is common, but it is costly in earning, meaning that people who change their job after being unemployed tend to earn less salary than before. And from this four graph in the right hand side, it also illustrates that the occupation switch and earning change is different across demographic group. So for occupation switch for the unemployed worker, it is 10%, while the unemployed is five times than the employed people who change their job. And for the earning penalty, we can see that the employed people who switch occupation have an earning penalty of about 2%, while the unemployed who found new job saw an earning penalty of 15%, which is higher than the employed people. And last but not least, women and lower skilled workers are likely to receive earning penalty than youth based on this graph. So that's the end of my part. Now we move to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene, for the floor. So I'll move on to my part. I'm going to talk about the policy response to COVID-19 shock, job retention versus worker reallocation. So as you have heard from Darlene, labor market transition could create job separation, and it causes youth with lower skills tend to hurt more. So can policy help mitigate this effect while also aiding any needed labor market adjustment? The answer is yes. During the pandemic, policy that devoted in preserving employment is initiated to protect the employee by providing employment income insurance. However, the outlook here try to point out the two main labor market policy: job retention and job reallocation. So job retention refer to the way that maintain existing match between worker and employer, such as wage subsidy, short-term worker scheme, while job reallocation create new job and facilitate worker shift away from shrinking and toward growing sector and occupation, like startup incentive, job searching assistance. As such, you can see in the graph here on the public spending on retention and reallocation policy, we can see that most likely the government spend more on preserving employment. However, there is also a least spending on the job retention and job reallocation as well. So then the new study model is developed to estimate between retention and reallocation policy in responding to an adverse lockdown or social distancing shock. So move to the next slide, please. Next, I will brief about the empirical estimate of labor market policy effectiveness. So in this part, the outlook build an analysis of individual labor market transition variable capture on spending as a share of average income per unemployed person on labor market policy aimed at job retention and worker reallocation are included in the linear probability. So the model incorporates fixed effect, country and time. However, omitted variable correlated with labor market policy still concerned. So the data interpret that, as you can see in the graph here, the job retention has a lower job job finding probability. Oh wait, okay, I see now. While also having a high overall likelihood on a job occupation switch. Similar to the retention, reallocation also lower job separation and raise the likelihood on the job occupation activity around 6% lower than the job retention. So as you can see in the graph here, it interprets like this. Move on to the next slide. In addition, there are also two graphs on the demographic group that affect by the job retention and job reallocation. As you can see in the job retention policy graph, you tend to get a lower probability in job finding or on the job sector switch. They have less chance to switch their work from one sector to another. However, lower skilled workers get a chance to lower their job separation, but they also could not switch their profession too. As for women, they increase their chance in switching their job to another sector for around 2%. In contrast, for the job relocation policy, as you see in the graph, the right graph, it increased probability of both women and youth in job finding with assistance. However, it also slightly increased women in job separation too. Furthermore, reallocation boosts all groups in pursuing job in other sector. However, it also makes women less likely to switch their profession in around 1%. The results are consistent with a greater risk of layoff for the lower skill after an adverse shock, and thus there are greater benefit from the retention policy. In the case of youth, the result may reflect the greater capability to benefit from reallocation spending related to training. Women typically are weaker in labor force attachment and may also translate into a great sensitivity to reallocation policy that enhance job finding. And that's it for my part. Let's move on to the next presenter.
So, thank you, Sawat. Good evening, lecturer and everyone. First of all, I want to test that does anyone hear my voice clearly?
Yes.
Okay, so the next part is in the policy response part again is focus on the job retention versus worker reallocation. So in this part, it's talk about economic policy, and it also states that retention and reallocation policy can be an effective tool to respond to the labor market deterioration caused by the COVID-19 pandemic recession. And it the author is also use newly developed labor market search and matching model to explain this policy. And this model is referred to the relation between worker and firm, that worker either searching for a job while firm is either vacant until the worker match with the firm vacancy. And before that, we also need to understand the persistence of the shock. Like there is a transitory shock, which means or you can it refer to a COVID-19 pandemic, where the productivity returned to the initial level after the shock abate. And another shock is more likely a hybrid shock, which have largely largely have a transitory shock, but with also some permanent component shock as well. And the economic policy, they also raise the three policy scenario, which are the retention support, reallocation support, and package support. Retention support here, let government provide transfer payment to firm to support a portion of their wage, but their wage when the match become unprofitable. And while the reallocation support is mean the government offer a subsidy to firm to reduce their vacancy cost and also stimulated job creation. And while the package support here, it means like the combine between the retention support and also the reallocation support. So can you move to the next slide? So in this panel, we can see the it's about the unemployment rate and distribution of worker, and they will compare between the when the rate when there is a transitory shock, and another one is when there is a hybrid shock. And during the transitory shock, so that when the shock hit the economy, it reduced the output produced by firm and worker, and making some job much unprofitable and leading to job loss, and it's a sharp rise in unemployment. And in that case, example like the COVID-19, that we can see some worker have shift their job to find other job, and also some have stopped working, that lead to the rise of unemployment rate. And firm profitability increase with worker productivity, and this can some lower skill worker have affected from the shock also. And however, employment in less impacted occupation is unchanged. Less impacted occupation here, like the occupation that they don't affected by the shock. And so the worker in the less impacted occupation, they are opt to switch occupation at any time. While refer to the panel 2, which is about the hybrid shock, and we can see that it is clear that the unemployment path is worse with the hybrid shock, because like as I mentioned earlier, it is combined with largely of the transitory shock and permanent shock. And in here, like the firm anticipate matches on more impacted occupation will become less profitable in the future. While if it is in the long run, the hybrid shock here is never fully recover at all. So let's move to the next slide. So in this graph, like they also mention about the effect and cost of labor market policy during different shock. So about the diagram number 3 here refer to unemployment rate, and as I mentioned, the policy support through the job retention measure is the most effective for taking down the rise unemployment rate. And we can see if they use the retention support, there is a 4.5 percentage less, and with the reallocation support there is like a quarter percentage less, while with the package support like they lead to a lower near unemployment rise and also a fast decline in unemployment compared to the no policy benchmark, like compared to if we don't use any support. Regarding to the deficit and job, if we use job retention support, it can reduce the increase in government deficit, means that we can saving from the lower unemployment benefit payout. While reallocation support, it lead deficit with government deficit to increase further. Because some costs with the creation of new job, and also it is not effective at stemming the increase in unemployment. For the package support, I can say that it make it better if we compare to the long run, because of the improvement from reallocation and end up spending lower than other scenario. So let's move to other slide. And in this slide, the the report also mentioned about the unemployment rate under the retention support, and we compare between the transitory shock and also the hybrid shock. And also another diagram is we also use the unemployment rate under the reallocation support and also compare to the two shocks as well. For the diagram number 5, like the job retention measure show very different between the transitory and the hybrid. Because the job retention measure here is like it can be costly and also have a long lasting impact in the transitory shock. While in the diagram number 6, like if you use the worker reallocation measure, is also more effective than no policy benchmark in reduce unemployment in response to the hybrid shock. We and in this case, like we could see most poorest worker, they benefit most from the job retention support in the short term. So let's move to the next slide. In this diagram, like they focus about the income inequality, and the first diagram, like they mentioned that the retention policy work to reduce the inequality impact, because this policy is to preserve the job market and also prevent worker from falling into unemployment. While and in the second diagram, the policy package which combine between the retention and reallocation, it does a bit better. That unemployment come down faster when reallocation is deployed to the permanent component of shock. And the conclusion like of this part, like it means that the better respond to the COVID-19 pandemic recession, or you mean, or it refer to a transitory shock, it would be a policy package that combine retention and reallocation measure to respond to the mix of the transitory and permanent shock. So I think that's all for my part. Let's move to another speaker.
Thank you, Richard. So I will conclude everything. So as you have observed from our members so far, that the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences continue to unfold. with profound effects that's already visible in labor markets around the world, despite extraordinary policy support. The shock has been highly asymmetric in its effects across sectors and occupation, contributing to inequality across workers group. Large uncertainties about the ultimate persistence of the shock and the potential need for structural transformation in its wake is still remain to be seen. And for this chapter 3, as you see from the introduction, there are 4 questions. The chapter 3 attempt to shed light on the COVID-19 pandemic recession, on labor market and how it compare with a past downturn, and how policy, particularly like job retention and worker relocation policies, may improve unemployment dynamics after an adverse and asymmetric shock, which answer to the 4 questions that they also have raised in their research question. The next, please move. So the question 1, they asked about what is the sectoral character of the COVID-19 pandemic recession so far, and how it does it compare with past recession. So the author have found that the first question sheds light into the characteristic of recession, where we saw a sharp decline in intensive job, such as wholesale and retail, trade, transportation, accommodation, and food service, while job in service such as IT, ICT, communication, finance, and insurance have increased during COVID-19 pandemic. These can be also observed as a similar pattern in past recession. And the next, please move to this next question. And the second question, the author have raised the research question: how have labor market inflows and outflows across sectors behave in recession and recoveries? The second question they ask: do recession tend to amplify sectoral employment trend? So the second question, they shed light into market labor during recession, which are characterized by declines in gross hiring rates and rises in gross separations. Job-to-job rates also decreased during the recession, which suggests that reallocation through job-to-job changes is inhibited during a downturn. Further, as my group mate have presented, employment in vulnerable sector is more affected during COVID-19 pandemic than automation job, which also the shift from the former to the latter that caused the decrease of demand for worker with lower skill. And the third question, the name, please. Thank you. So the third question, the author asked how do individual labor market outcomes, including sectoral and occupational employment transition and associated earning gains, losses, behave and differ across demographic groups like age, gender, and skill, and the business cycle. So the third question is shed light into individual labor market outcomes across demographic groups during recession. The author found that lower skilled worker will tend to be harder in job finding than higher skilled worker, and women is harder than men during market transition. Furthermore, prime age worker have more advantage than youth in job finding during economic downturns. Moreover, wages increase and decrease during recession for occupational switch that is vary as those who are on the job. So slight increase of only 2%, while those who were in unemployment spare face the penalty of 15%. And the last question, the last research question, they try to question that how effective are labor market policy encouraging job retention versus worker relocation against diverse effect from asymmetric shocks across sectors and occupations. And the second question did ask that the persistence of the shock matter. So the fourth question shed light that into important policy that keep the economy above the water. The first is job retention and worker reallocation policy, like previous members have shown. Like a job retention policy are found to be useful in reducing unemployment and the rising of unemployment further, and providing a near-term income insurance for the more affected group of workers, such as those of lower skill. The policy has been implemented like in the US program, like of the Paycheck Protection Program and the Employee Retention Tax Credit, and the program of the Expedient de Regulation Temporal de Amplio of Span. Further, worker reallocation policy have mitigate the effect of permanent shock, where foster of job creation perform better in the long term than switch to the new equilibrium, because labor market adjust to permanent uh, changes in the economy structure brought by the pandemic shock. And finally, the persistence of the shock matter because COVID-19 pandemic is hastening a move away from employment that is more vulnerable to automation and less teleworkable. Thus, a new measure had to be implemented to adjust structure change, like retaining and more general human capital investment that boost worker productivity could be deployed, because this policy have the potential to make the existing job markets more profitable and resilient, and also have workers become more able to switch occupational in if the decision in the future hit once again, like COVID pandemic 19. Thank you. This is all. The next is move. So about discussion question, we propose one scenario. You might read here. So the scenario that imagine that you are a policy maker for Cambodia, and you should think of what kind of labor market policies that would you recommend to prepare our lower skilled workers for a future shock like this COVID-19 pandemic, or like the 2008 financial crisis. Thank you. This is all from our group presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, presenter. That is very technical, okay, presentations. That's very great that the group have managed to bring about and go through this very technical chapter. Okay, you can say that chapter 3 is actually more technical in the report. I have just a very few comment and for the presenter, and then we can go to the discussion. So let me move to Dane part. I think Dane actually talked in the presentation in the beginning, and Dane actually did mention things like the high skill and the low skill in a part, but I like to know is there any kind of definitions that what do we refer to when we talk of high skill or low skill according to the report? Hello, Dane. So what is the definition for the high skill and low skill in your presentation? Okay, hello, Dande. Is everything okay with the questions? Very a little bit technical question, but I think it's quite important because we always keep talking about high skill, low skill, high skill job, low skill job. So maybe we need to have some I mean understanding, okay, of this keyword. Hello, Dane. Can you find the definition in the report for the high skill and low skill?
I think she lost connection, lecture.
Okay, so I think since we don't have time, I think I'm not quite sure with what is in the report, but generally we have a classifications of job. We call occupation classifications, and has been defined by the UN standard like the UNIDO or the ILO. Okay, they have the certain group of occupation which could be regarding as more skill, things like the technician, professional, okay, and ranking to the lowest elementary job, okay, and I mean here. So generally in the UN system, they have the classifications of this kind of job. So when people talk about the high skill and low skill, okay, they referring to this kind of classifications. And the classification actually based on both the hard skill and the education, I mean the general education needed for each kind of occupation, each kind of job. Okay, hope you have heard about this. We call the industry classification of occupation. Okay, we call and the industry classification of sector. This is the system of the UN, United Nations, of the UNIDO and also the ILO. Okay, I think I can move to Vari part. Vari discuss about I follow a point you said about he mentioned about a sector that is vulnerable to the automations. Right, Vari?
Yes, lecturer.
Yes. Can you explain a little bit more? What is those kind of sector?
Um, so sector here refers to the industries, type of industry. For instance, it could be manufacturing, it could be agriculture. So these two main sectors are considered to be vulnerable to automation is because like um, automation could actually easily replace human on the sector. For instance, like for agriculture right now, the owner of the farm and the owner of the rice field, they are trying to use implement more machines and hire less people. And the only people they hire are a few skilled workers to like manage or control those machines. So because of this reason, those low skilled workers are forced to be unemployed and move to other different sectors. And combined with the COVID-19 crisis, it's really difficult for them to actually find jobs in other sector elsewhere.
Okay, thank you, Vari, for giving the explanations. That's right. Okay. Generally, this kind of automation is that the job the task is being replaced by the machine. Generally, the automation tend to be in the job which is low skill and kind of job that is tend to have repeating routine jobs. Okay, easily being replaced by these automations. For example, record in accounting, okay, is being you can use the machine because that kind of job is routine kind of job. So low skill and routine jobs, okay, are easily vulnerable to the automations. just like Barry mentions, it's quite true. Okay. Okay. Like to move to the lean part. The lean actually give a definition on. I think I remember to talk about the recessions, the recovery, and growing, right? Something like growing. But I'm looking at the definition that. Can you just share the slide again? Is Dane back? Dane, can you share the slide again?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah, previous slide, please. Yes, this one. Okay. So there are three kind of period, right? Expansions, recovery, and the recessions. So recession is easy. It means that negative GDP growth. And recovery is the G after recession. But expansion, when I look at here, it seems like it's the period where economy is moving out of recessions. So my question is that the definition you got from the report, or is one that you uh, get somewhere else? Because I'm not so clear the difference between the expansion and recovery. It seems like here it means like the same thing. Okay.
Yes, like actually I cannot find the definition of expansions in the report, so I did the internet search and found this.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you. So in the business cycle, these are called business cycle, okay? And we can split business cycle into three kind of, cycle. Expansion generally referring to years where economy keep growing. For example, 3%, 6%, 7%. I mean, you have a positive economic growth consecutive years for maybe 3, 4, or 5 years. That's called expansions. Recession is the period opposite, mean you have a negative or declining economic growth, or negative economic growth. And recovery is that it's moving. You're moving from negative growth to become positive. So you need some consecutive years, okay, in order to say this is a period of expansion. This is a period of recovery. This is a period of recession. Okay. Anyway, thank you for that. One more thing about your part, you make comparison. I think in the next slides, you have the compare of women's. I think, can you show that next slide, please? Yes, this one. It say that this is the average probability across demographic group, and it measure in percentage point deviation comparing to the best group. So looking at the chart, can you explain what is the best group here? I think the previous slide, right? Slide number 9, right? Yes, this one. So all of these bar, okay, are comparing to a best group. Okay. So what is the best group here? I mean, is there any mention in the article, in the report?
Yes, like in the article, they mentioned that the base group is the prime age and high skill men.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you. So all these are comparing to the main group, okay, the skill group, prime age, okay. Okay, thank you, Darlene. Move to so what Can you show me your part on the, I mean, you have a chart, which, yes, this one. What is the number on the vertical? I mean, you have 0 0.5, 1.0, 1.5, and 2.0. What is that?
Is this a percentage of GDP, lecturer?
Okay, so this is a spending and it measures a percentage to GDP.
Yes.
Okay. And for Richard, I have one question. Is about the, it's not a question, it's just to draw attention. You have the inequality, right? You talk about inequality. Can you show the chart, I mean the graphics? I think you have the last, the bar chart, you have Gini, right? Gini, yes, this one. I think the first part, right? It's like a Gini, income inequality, right? And it seemed like the reallocation policy is working the best in so reallocation policy actually are much more effective than the retention policy, because it seems like it reduced a lot the income inequality, the Gini. So Gini is a kind of measure, a measurement, I mean, that we use to measure the inequality, income inequality. Okay. It's one of the measure that economists again use to measure inequality in the countries. And the lower the number of the Gini, okay, it means that the country is more equal. The bigger the number of Gini mean bigger inequal. Okay, so just to draw your attention on this, but you will learn about this, I think, next semester in the development economic about the Gini coefficient. Okay, that's all. You can move to your discussion questions and move to your discussion questions. Okay, I think next slide, right? Please, next slide. So the group have the question for us to discuss. Lane, can you move to the next slide, please?
Later, is this one the discussed question?
Yes, please show your discussion question, please.
Do you see the slide right now?
Yeah, can you make it full? Okay, I saw it. So the question is, suppose you are a policymaker. So what kind of labor market policy would you recommend in order to prepare the lower skilled workers, okay, for a future economic shock, so that they would be easy to, I mean, retain their jobs, or maybe switching to other kind of job, or keep growing. Okay, so would you have any question or any key term you feel you want the group to explain? Please let them know. Okay, so I think if you don't have, I'd like to Okay, please wait a minute. I'm trying to get our presenter to support you in each room. So room 1, I have Richard. and the link there. Room 2, we have Sitchanit. Room 3, we have Swat. Room 4, and okay, so I'm going to get the link to room 4 to support room 4. And in room 5, we have Vari there. Okay, so I'm going to start the room now, and you have 10 minutes for discussions. So let's open the room now. Okay, hello back everyone. Sorry to bring you back to the room, the main room. Next, I think I'd like to invite room 1 for sharing the discussion results. So in room 1 we have Sukun Konita, Saina, Sunhu, Sovisa, Richard, and Radavin. Please.
Hi. As a representative from Room 1, we have reached a conclusion of for the policies to subsidize employment programs that provide on-site employment and training programs for when they're laid off, and then when things get better and then they go back to work, so they have new skill sets, and programs that provide life skill training and shown to improve work rates and earning. Also to design and implement necessary policies to develop a more complete, coordinated and unified vision of the education and vocational training system, as I said earlier, to support the upgrading of Cambodian production system from low technology, low wage cluster to medium and high technology clusters by increasing the educational vocational training attainment, enriching and diversifying it as well. That is it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, room 1, for sharing your discussion. I'd like to move to room 2. Room 2, we have Manirot, Chanvisal, Dalaya, Satinit, Morakot, Liang An, and Nuchimin. Please.
Thank you, lecturer. So for our group, policies that we suggest, the same as the group presentation. There are two: active policy and passive policies. For active policy, we suggest for the employment incentive and as well as labor market training. Of course, training is one essential policy that government cannot avoid, because it creates skill for the people, and when people have skill, they can survive, they can create their own income during the difficult time. So training is the best policy that if we were the policy maker, we will adopt that training skill for our peoples. And another one is employment subsidized. The government play an important role to subsidize their people by creating the enterprise, public enterprise that recruit the local people who have a less skill or specific skill to do in that public work, so that they can gain more profit from the government, and they can also find the income, find the budget to support government as well by creating the product and sell to the market. And I think that's all from our group. Thank you.
Thank you, Manirot from room 2 for sharing the discussion. And next, I'd like to invite room 3. In room 3, we have Kamhur, Swat, Lee Hao, Cho Lee Hieng, Sia Kung, and Sri Pik and Samnan. Please.
Yeah, okay. So I would like to represent my group 3. So not much difference from the first and second group. So so other than the employment, trying to relocate it, or trying to okay, so let me start again. So okay, so first one, we think that the government should have a policy or have a like a training, like a center that to help those low skill worker to re-employment, such as where should they work for either temporary or permanently, like and then the government should provide trainings to help the unemployed worker to adapt to a new working environment. So this is the first policy that we recommend. So for the second one, the government should also expanding the unemployment insurance. So I think this is good because if I'm not wrong, the government actually doing it now in Cambodia, that the NSSF, the BOSOSO. So it's not just for the health, but I think it's also for the retirement and also the job loss or accident insurance of the worker as well. So I think the government, they can further research and develop on that expansions of the insurance of the worker. So the government also in order to secure or how to make the worker can support themselves even they have a certain job loss. So these are the two policy that we could think of. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lee Ho from Room 3 for sharing the discussion. Next, I'd like to invite Room 4. We have put Tritirit, Ponyorot, Udam, Chandanit, Senasa, and Setikun and Dalin, please.
So our group, we have one policy and 3 trading to recommend here. So the first one is 5% saving policy. So we recommend that you save 5% of your salary per month voluntarily. And when you save your salary, you will be given special interest rate. And for the 3 training, we recommend entrepreneurship training because during COVID time, we see that a lot of business is conducted online. So when you are stuck at home, you can make money by being an entrepreneur and sell something. And one more is digital application training. So not a lot of people know how to use digital app like Grab Delivery, Yamapaybon, or Food Panda. So if you are an entrepreneur, you want to deliver something, you need training to use that app effectively. And lastly is a lot of people overlook, but computer and English training is very crucial because a lot of low-skilled worker, the English is they have their own limit. So if we can give more English and computer training, they can understand more about digital, about how to use English effectively to conduct business, to conduct communication, or something too. Even though the majority of our app have Khmer, but some Khmer translation is very hard to understand and a lot of typo. That is all from our room, Chair.
Okay, so let me invite Room 5. We have Sonita Senha, Vari, Robish, Dane, and Shumei, please.
Yes, teacher. So I am the representative of Group 5. So we would like to suggest few recommendations. The first one is the digitalization in the long run. Actually, because of low skill worker, they do not familiarize with digitals or network. So it is best to prepare them so that they can improve themselves. So digitalization here through familiarize the low skill labor with technology, and also familiarize them with high skill labor environment as well, because through technology and digitalization, that is where the high skill labor work at. And we can digitalize by enhancing education and provide some special training equally for all, especially for the rural area. And the second recommendation is to improve social welfare, especially healthcare system and education, because through this better social welfare, we believe that the people will have a chance to compromise their living standard. And the third recommendation is the additional training. For this, we focus on the factor model, which is the industry or the company. We would pressure them to provide some additional training for the worker, because normally the industry or the company that use low skill labor worker, they do not really care about their human resource. They only care about their input. So people who use so the low skill labor, they do not really have a lot of opportunity to improve themselves. They just work and go home, like the life cycle like this every day. So it would be better if the company or the industry could provide some additional training, maybe once or twice a month for all the workers, so that they could improve along the way. So in the future, if there will be a shock, then people will no longer be the low skill all the time. They will improve themselves in the future. So this is all from Group 5, teacher.
Thank you, Group 5, for sharing the discussion. Well, I think you already mentioned about training, and I do agree it's quite important, training. We see in the report that the problem is with low skill, that they will be affected by the automation, because you do distant work, then company would have to replace them with the machine. So these workers will need to have to be training or retraining the new skill that would be ready for them to switch the job, or to have a new job, or to secure their jobs. So I'm agree, and you all mentioned of this. It's very important about the training and people. Okay, I saw people talk about on-site training, and this is quite important. From my point of view, I think the most important is the firm itself. They can know what kind of skill that is needed, because they went through the shock economics problem, so they know what the skill likely they need. But in our country, we see, like Group 5 mentioned, employer are less likely to provide training for the workers. So that is maybe one of the weakness. We don't have enough skill or people for the job that needed. So I think incentive for firm to provide training to the worker is especially on-site training, on the job training is important. Another thing that our member in our class mentioned is about the social security protection and system. Yeah, that's quite true, because when this worker during the crisis, they lose the job and they don't have income to survive. So it's important that they have some kind of the social security system that provide them some of minimum income support for them to survive. Okay, and as Group 3 actually talk about the unemployment insurance, I like to say that we don't have this yet. We don't have the unemployment insurance in our country. They do only have the boss also is for disease, for a kind like injury on the jobs, and the pension system. Okay, but they don't have the unemployment insurance yet. Well, unemployment insurance actually is quite important for keeping us, helping people who lose the job, but it also have costs along with that. From experience of other country, it could be a place that disincentive people to work, because some people are willing to claim insurance rather than trying to get a new jobs. So in many countries, the period that you can entitle to receive the claim and income from the unemployment insurance is limited to just only 1 or 2 months, and then you have to find new jobs. Okay, if they keep you long, you will become disincentive, and it become a system that discourage people from looking for a job. So another thing is setting up this kind of social security system. You need to have fund or money, the source to finance. Generally, it can be coming from the people who contribute part of their salary, or the company who pay on behalf of the workers, or maybe the government who finance. Okay, and generally when it comes to government financing this kind of scheme, they have to go to tax collection, and it's you and me who will pay it. Okay, so that's kind of the problem is that have to be sustained. Okay, we don't need a social security system that just only for 2 or 3 years, but for the next 10, 50 years or 4 years still working. That's what we should have for sustainability for the social. So this kind training, digital skill retraining, on-site, on-job training, social security system, just like all of you have mentioned, are quite important for not only for Cambodia, but I think for any emerging market economy. I think it's very important. So I think that's all. Thank you for sharing such a good discussion. So I'd like to end the meeting here. We'll meet again next week. Next week I will take some time to talk about the preparation for your midterm. Okay, after next week we will have the midterm. Okay. So enjoy your evening. Have a good time with your family. I'll see you again next week. And goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, teacher.